Hello, economics students. We're continuing our discussion of unemployment. Going to finish that up today. One of the questions, subsection 3 in chapter 21, is about cyclical unemployment. So we talked about the people who, voluntarily leave the workforce, those who get fired. That happens all the time. The natural unemployment rate in America these days, at least until the recent crisis, has been between 3 and 5%. That natural turnover that happens, people leaving one job, looking for other work, people get fired for poor performance, people who've just completed their education and looking for their first job. 3 to 5% is natural unemployment in a modern industrialized economy, at least it has been. But there's also cyclical unemployment, meaning it ties to the business cycle, those periods of boom and bust that we've talked about before. One of the things that those cyclical unemployment issues raise is discussed in subsection 3, why wages might be sticky downward. Because what you would think would happen is when a lot of people are losing their jobs, what ought to happen as unemployment goes up, wages ought to drop, right? The demand curve for labor shifts to the left, and you would think that moves the equilibrium point where wages are set downward, right? People should be paid less when unemployment is high. But actually, that doesn't happen as much as you might think. And, well, part of it could just be human compassion. Bosses don't want people to have to take pay cuts because they know it would be a hardship to them. No doubt that's part of it. But there are other theories that explain why it is that you don't find employers cutting wages when unemployment goes up very much, if at all. The efficient wage theory describes the idea that productivity depends on pay. So if you're getting well paid, you will be more productive. If they try to cut your pay, you may very well be less productive. You don't feel like, why should I bust my butt working for this guy when he cuts my pay? And you may throttle back your efforts commensurate with the amount your pay is being cut. So that's the efficiency wage theory. If employers know this, they're going to do their best not to cut pay because they don't want less productive workers, especially if they've had to lay off workers. Probably more people need to be doing more work per person still working for the firm, not less. You need more productive workers, not less productive. Oh, and the phrase implicit contract appears in the paragraph before that. Implicit means not explicit, not openly stated, sort of quietly understood, a kind of what used to be called a gentleman's agreement that's not actually said, but just understood. The implicit contract is, you're going to keep paying me what you've been paying me and not going to cut my pay, and I'm going to stay with you unless I give you plenty of warning I'm leaving, right? A lot of times people give 2 weeks notice on a job. That may not even be written down anywhere. It's just kind of customary. And in many places, it might even be more than 2 weeks that they let their employers know if they're leaving. That's part of this implicit contract, that your boss is not going to be cutting your pay unless it's absolutely necessary and after a long notice it could happen. And that you're not going to just pick up and take off one day. You're going to keep coming and doing your job and give them good, fair warning if you are going to leave. So that might be why wages are sticky, even though unemployment's going up, wages don't fall much. This implicit agreement. Adverse selection of wage cuts arguments indicates that the best workers are not going to have their wages cut. So because they're the ones most likely to be able to leave and find good jobs at other places. So if you're laying people off from your firm, it's probably your least best workers, right? The ones who are left are your quality staff. And if you cut their wages, they're the ones best qualified to get other good paying jobs. So you will lose them if you cut their wages. So don't cut their wages if you want to keep your best employees. That's the argument there. The insider-outsider model is sort of the explanation for LIFO, last in, first out. The most recent hire is probably the first one to get let go. So the people who are insiders, the ones who've been there the longest, are the ones who are likely to keep their jobs and keep their pay at the same level without being cut. It's beneficial to businesses to have a lot of insiders around. These are people who know the corporate culture. They know how to get things done there. The newbie hasn't got the experience in the corporation yet. They're still, in a way, learning the ropes. So losing them when there's an uptick in unemployment is not as harmful to the firm as losing the old-timers who know their way around, know what's done, and so on. Each firm has a corporate culture, and you need your old-timers around. Gracewood needs teachers who've been there 4 or 5 years, and everybody's not brand new every year, right? The school works better when people know what they're doing, and they've been there, done that. Same thing is true in every business. So the insiders, the people who've been there a while, don't cut their wages because they might get mad and leave, and you don't want that. Relative wage coordination argument says, if everybody in the firm takes the cut, people will take it better psychologically. They won't get enough and leave. So if you hear that there's going to be pay cuts at a firm, the CEO better take a proportionate pay cut, or you could have big trouble. The executives better take the pay cut that the people further down the food chain are taking, and on a proportionate basis, or you could easily have a mass worker rebellion and exodus in a time when you need people around who know what they're doing. So that's what that's talking about. All right. What causes changes in unemployment in the long run? Now, this is where they talk about natural unemployment. That's, again, those things that are always going to be happening. There are always going to be people who are just out of school and are looking for their first job, and it takes them a little while to find one. There are always going to be people who just aren't happy with this job and they quit to find a different job. That is always going to happen, even in the most booming of booming economies. And that's known as the natural unemployment rate. It's 3 to 5% in most industrialized economies. Workers who would like to have jobs, but at the moment they don't. There are always going to be people, maybe women who left to have kids, and after their kids are back in school, they want a job. It's going to take them a little while to find work, probably. So there'll be that natural unemployment. It's never going to go away. But that's okay. We need a little slop in the labor force, so there'll always be people looking for work if a business needs an employee, right? Frictional unemployment is the unemployment that occurs as workers move between jobs. So, this again is part of the natural unemployment I was just talking about. I decide I'm going to make a career change. So there's going to be a time before I find that new work, moving from one employer to another. Structural unemployment is unemployment that comes because the economy is restructuring. There once were a lot more people engaged in the mining of coal in America than there are today. That is because we have a lot more sources of energy than coal. Once upon a time, the vast majority of electric power plants were powered by coal. Today, a great many of them are powered by natural gas. So you don't need as much coal. Wind power is coming in, solar power in some places making a dent. With each of those new technologies, less and less need for coal. Coal is inexpensive, and of course, it's environmentally dirty. So there are going to be coal miners who are out of work simply because the economy is moving away from coal as a source. Once upon a time, there were hundreds of thousands of Americans who made saddle harnesses and things for horses. Now, I'm sure it's a niche market I'm sure it's a fraction of the number of people who make things for horse saddles and the like as did 100 years ago, because people just don't use horses the way they did now. It's a recreation thing. Then it was an essential everyday activity 120 years ago, right? So vastly higher proportion. And the unemployment's going to come when those jobs are just not needed anymore. Productivity shifts and the natural rate of unemployment. This is interesting. As technologies, it's often technologies, make workers more productive, normally higher productivity means, you would think, higher employment. But actually, that's not always so. The coming of the personal computer into the office in the late 70s and especially the 1980s meant that individual office workers became much more productive. But it actually led to an increase in unemployment in the office setting. Think about it. You used to have secretaries who were stenographers. The boss would dictate, they'd write it down in shorthand. Then the shorthand goes to the typing pool, where a bunch of, usually women, would type up the things into regular English speech. You don't need stenographers and typing pool people anymore with a word processor. The boss can dictate into a tape recorder. It goes to one administrative assistant whose job it is to listen and type on the word processor. So you can eliminate, with those technologies, 2 jobs that used to be there. So actually, studies have been done to find that the average American office worker became like more than twice as productive from 1970 to 1990. And that's almost entirely computer technology. But unemployment for those jobs actually went up because you didn't need as many people to do what one person with a computer on the desk could do. On the other hand, the internet made workers much more productive than it had been. That makes sense, perfect sense. But it actually led to some employment because new opportunities were opened up with internet-based firms and the like. So you can get that. Productivity, your book points out in the 1970s, productivity slowed down unexpectedly. This probably had to do with a general economic slowdown, in part caused by government overspending, in part caused by the OPEC-designed oil crisis. So from 1973 to 1982, there was a productivity increase of only 0.8%. And that led to an increase in unemployment. The internet comes along and productivity goes up, employment goes up. So it works. All right. Public policy and unemployment. The most interesting thing is unemployment insurance. That is funded by the federal government taking money from employers to go into an unemployment fund, but then it's block granted to the states, and the states can distribute it as they see fit. How long you get it, how much you get is determined by your state. So as it points out there in Mississippi, you get unemployed, you're being paid $235 a week, and it's a fairly short period of time. That's not a lot of money. You are not going to be able to pay rent on an apartment in this neighborhood anywhere for all your unemployment benefits if you're getting Mississippi amounts of money. Whereas Massachusetts, $674 a week. That's more than $2,500 a month. You can survive on that. So that's up to the states. The natural rate of unemployment in recent years, that section is talking about how in the last couple of decades, the natural employment rate has gone down, in part because of technology. It is much easier to find a job today than it was 20, 30 years ago. Before the internet, you're pounding the pavement, you're knocking on doors, you're sending out paper letters with stamps on them, right? Those were before email, before the internet. it was harder to find a job. Now there are job boards and the information, we're awash with information. You want to work for a particular company, you can look it right up on their website, right, as to what jobs are available, what expertise are needed. The growth in the temporary worker industry means more people are employed. And a lot of times, firms hire temps. They see how you do the job, and if they're looking to make a permanent worker out of somebody, they've got 6 months of experience watching you on the job where you're learning what they need you to know. So in some ways, that's a win for the company to hire temps and then turn them into full-time workers later. Unfortunately, in the Great Recession, a lot of firms just kept temps on for years. They did that because they didn't have to pay you health benefits and things like that. Temp workers don't get the full package of benefits full-time workers do. So that isn't always a good thing. But it does mean lower unemployment. The temp firms you're employed, maybe just not as much as a full-time employee would be earning and get the benefits for. The aging of the baby boom has meant that baby boomers are aging out. I was born in the very last year of the baby boom. I'm 55 right now. So people who are 10 years older than me, people born in 1954, in the height of the baby boom, they're 65 now. So they might well be retiring. So as the baby boom clears out, they're not going to be in the workforce anymore, right, when they retire. So that can also edge down the natural unemployment rate because you're going to have fewer people in the workforce to start with as the baby boom ages out into retirement. The last little tidbit, the mysterious case of missing candidates. During the Great Recession, a lot of employers said, we can't find the candidates to fill the jobs we've got. And they said that was why there's unemployment, because there just aren't enough good quality candidates. Well, this little essay points out that may be an artificial phenomenon. During the Great Recession, when corporations were laying people off, some of the first people they let go were in their human resources department, the hiring department. After all, they're not going to let go first workers on their assembly line. High-ranking executives are probably not the first out the door either. They're going to go for people who seem to not be as essential, like the third and second clerk in the human resources department. Those people often lost their jobs in the Great Recession early. But those are the people who know how to go about hiring good quality candidates. And what human resources know is often what a business really needs is an intelligent, capable, generally experienced person who is flexible, because they can slot in and do all kinds of jobs with just a little training and on-the-job experience. They are flexible enough to do lots of jobs. Once they started letting these experts in hiring people go, a lot of times the boss himself is writing the description for what they're looking for. And what they were looking for was their ideal candidate. Someone with exactly the right education in the field. Someone with 20 years experience in the field. Somebody who knows every computer program you could possibly need to know to do the job. And someone who on day one will be able to do the job with with perfect ability, like someone who'd been doing the job for 20 years. That's what the boss wants. Of course that's what the boss wants. But how many people are out there looking for work with those kind of qualifications? The spectacular candidate probably already has a job, or will get a new job with another firm probably through some back channel, because they'll know they're not going to be advertising, looking at job boards, because they're the perfect candidate. This is what apparently in HR is called a purple squirrel. There are lots of good quality brown squirrels out there, red squirrels out there, but the purple squirrels, nope. What the employer, what the boss wants is a purple squirrel, and they just aren't to be found. Thoughtful and interesting. All right, we'll move on next time to chapter 27. Chapter 27. Take care. Bye.